I grew up in the Methodist Church, reciting the Apostles' Creed every Sunday. It was embedded in my mind and ready to spill out at 11 o'clock every week. My sister was 6 years older than me, which was more like a second mom in my young teenage years. She had started going to a Presbyterian church with her now husband. As a young teenager, I ended up going to church with them, to the Presbyterian church on a certain Sunday. And when they started reciting the Apostles' Creed, I can remember feeling excited that there was something familiar with the Methodist upbringing I was having with the Presbyterian church. Everything was good until in the middle of the Apostles' Creed, they said, an excursus from what I was used to, he descended into hell. I'll tell you what, I was aghast. The texts in view are 1 Peter chapter 3, verses 18 through 20, and Ephesians chapter 4, verses 8 through 10. Evangelical scholar Wayne Grudem says that this idea is a late unscriptural addition that confuses believers. Others soften the language, reciting, he descended into the dead. But if we look back through church history, we find a spinning compass of interpretations. For instance, with the Roman Catholics, the descent was a literal rescue mission called the limbo of the fathers. They believe Christ's soul entered this peaceful compartment of Hades to announce the good news of redemption and deliver the Old Testament righteous who had been waiting for the gates of heaven to open. My longtime Southern Baptist pastor kind of believed a version of this. The story of the rich man and Lazarus was no parable. He's right about that. Parables don't have proper names like Lazarus. Couple that with Jesus' reference to the sign of Jonah, saying that the Son of Man would be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of that fish. My pastor felt like there were two compartments called Hades and Paradise, where, as the text says, you cannot cross from one to the other. When Jesus at Calvary says to the thief on the cross, today, you will be with me in paradise, well, that's not heaven, but that's one side called paradise. So is he right? Maybe. In the Eastern Orthodox tradition, the canonical resurrection icon, the Anastasis, doesn't depict Christ rising from a physical tomb. It shows him shattering the brass gates of Hades, standing on the broken doors of death, and physically pulling Adam and Eve out of the grave by their wrists. Lutherans, they go even further, declaring that the entire person of Christ, body and soul, made a victorious physical march into the heart of Satan's kingdom immediately before the resurrection, planting his banner of triumph to mock the devil and strip him of his keys. Move to the Reformationists, and John Calvin, for instance, vehemently rejected a literal post-mortem journey. He argued instead that the descent was a metaphor for the invisible spiritual torment Christ suffered on the cross, the utter agony of bearing God's infinite wrath, which culminated in the cry, my God, why have you forsaken me? Conversely, the Westminster Puritans chose a quieter, more literal path, saying that Christ's descent simply meant that he was buried and continued in the state and power of death for 3 days. So here's the thing. Where does this leave me, a person who values biblical clarity, yet longs for theological depth? Maybe you're there too. I think Wayne Grudem's right when he desires to protect the finished work of Christ on the cross. Jesus did not need to suffer post-mortem in the pit, but we don't need to delete the clause in order to preserve his victory either. When we confess that Christ ascended into hell, we're confessing the limitless reach of God's grace. Jesus went as low as our brokenness required him to go. He entered the full reality of the cold isolation of death. Thank Jesus he didn't float over our graves. No, he came down into them. Paul writes in Romans chapter 10 that we don't need to ask, who will descend into the abyss? That is, to bring Christ up from the dead. Why does he say that? Because Christ has already descended. He went into the deepest dark so that we would never have to go into that dark. Look, whatever it is that you and I might believe, as a result of these things. For us, it's the greatest blessing, no matter what the ultimate meaning and the intention, whether that's strictly literal or whether it is in some sense allegorical to us. The descent is the ultimate guarantee of grace. There's no depth of human grief, no grave, and no shadow of death where Christ has not gone before us, and from which he does not hold the keys to bring us home. I say, to God alone be the glory.